G'day, legends. I hope that you're having a fantastic day and a fantastic start to the week. And thank you for all the support over my channel in the past week. It's actually had a bit of an uptick, so thank you very much. Now, I wouldn't be a YouTuber if I didn't plug myself, or at least my merch. If you'd like to buy some merch, we have the Willies group merch. Yeah, feel free if you'd like to. But either way, thank you for supporting independent journalism and reporting, and hopefully some amount of reasonable reporting about this war from just the plethora of just emotionally driven reporting that I see. So today we have a fair bit to talk about. Of course, we're going to have a look at the maps. We're going to talk about calls for a ceasefire from a NATO country. Going to talk about the House of Representatives Speaker Johnson's new proposal, or what is maybe being brought through the House of Reps for then further support to Ukraine. But where we are going to start is, of course, this leaked phone call from Germany that we spoke in length about yesterday. Now, if you haven't watched that one, go ahead and watch that video. I think it's a good summary breakdown. Now, yesterday, because of research time, filming time, whatever, I said that it's not, 1,000% confirmed. But realistically, now that we're, days on from this coming out, there's been no flat out denial of the authenticity. So at this point, look, I'm happy to say that this is 99% a real authentic call. And we have seen more officials come out today talking about this. And the German Defense Minister, Boris Pistorius, unfortunate last name if you know the bloke with no legs, but it's a hybrid disinformation attack. It's about division. It's about undermining our unity. Now, one thing we do know, if you've read anything about old Soviet intelligence stuff, you're talking KGB operations, was about sowing division and about trying to break that unity. You can look into this. There's lots of really great books about this, but as well, it is an information attack. Informational warfare is a part of warfare, and it is going, of course, both ways in all war, but not saying flat out here that it's, a fake. Anyway, we must not fall for Putin's tricks. Adding Germany will react prudently, but no less decisively to the leak. And at this point, the leak is just very embarrassing that this has able to become out. And of course, in these as well, talking about looking for, was it actually a secure means to talk over? Now, myself being a low-ranking member of the military at one point in my life, no means like that is safe to talk about that sort of stuff other than some level of encrypted radios. But even then, you wouldn't say that over. It would be in person in a correctly prepared room. So there's definitely some people getting a large boot up the arse. Or anyway, former Defense Secretary Ben Wallace told the Times, we know Germany is pretty penetrated by Russian intelligence. So it just demonstrates they are neither secure nor reliable. So, of course, Ben Wallace from UK, former defence minister there, talking about all of this. Of course, the UK and France were called out in that conversation for having people on the ground directing the strikes from both the French Scalp and the British Storm Shadow missiles. That's where the real grittiness of this comes into, is Germany really calling out the UK and France in that conversation, and as well planning strikes against targets within Ukraine's territory where Russia is occupying at the moment. Some will say liberating. Take away just the words that Russia have that area at the time, and there are talks from NATO countries to conduct strikes in there by helping the Ukrainians put these on the planes. And I'm sure behind closed doors between different ministers around the world, there are some please explain questions about this. Now, let's firstly then go on to the maps. I think this will be interesting because we have seen some changes and, of course, a lot going on the front line. So, of course, here is Ukraine, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22 and the purple since 2014. Now, the main area we have to talk about is down in here, of course, Donetsk Oblast, and this is Avdiivka that sits here. Of course, Thankyou, Avdiivka, and Berdachi in here. Now, they are throwing everything at this, both Russia and Ukraine, to secure this area. Now, the change we've seen on the deep state map is this expansion of control around Avdiivka. Of course, we had geolocated footage in here yesterday, and that Avdiivka has really been confirmed mostly under control, that it is now under Russian control here. But Berdyaev up here still remains highly, highly contested, with a lot of forces being thrown at this from both sides. And of course, Ukraine pushing into here because they do not want Berdyaev to fall. Of course, to secure then the second line, to build up, to give time to the engineers, the troops behind the line, to build up the defensive works so this doesn't continue to fall further. Like we saw in when Avdiivka fell, that sort of quick sweeping momentum, they don't want that to happen further and further down the line. Now, how do we know that everything is being thrown at this? Well, I have answers for you, because we're seeing a lot of more modern equipment and videos coming out on the front line. Now, here, of course, we have a Russian T-90 and a BVM, two more of the modern Russian tanks here that have been destroyed in this direction. So we're seeing, the more high-tech equipment there. And of course, late last week, we saw, it's bloody Monday, sort of early last week or maybe the week before, we saw the first Abrams go down in this direction. Of course, this was newsworthy because it was just the first one of the Abrams, one of 31, so representing about 3%. Well, in Berdyaev, we have seen one more to a degree, and then another vehicle which is more important. Now, why am I focusing on this? Now, I understand that this tank is just a tank that they are vulnerable on the front line. But what this does tell us is that if Ukraine is using its most high-tech, its newest, and its tanks that they don't have that many of in this area, they're throwing everything at this to try to have it hold for as long as possible or regain territory here. So we have this first one of an Abrams here. Now, again, I always see people calling out, is this an Abrams? It's not, blah, blah, blah. But trust me, it is. An Abrams, just the shape of it, it's like trying to say that a Mazda 3 is a Ferrari. It's very obvious if you've seen one before what is what. So we see that it has been destroyed next to a vehicle here. We're going to have a photo and look over what may have happened here. But this is an FPV drone that is aiming for the turret. And then here is another one, of course, this with an RPG warhead. Now, how much damage can a warhead like this do to a tank, to armor? A lot. Just because these are an older RPG, trust me, I was anti-armor in the military. The penetration of even older RPGs is very great through different types of armor, especially because these don't have the newest armor that America has at least their variant. This is an export variant. But here we see, and I'll show a photo better, but we see a track has blown off here. So it has thrown track somehow, and then the hatches are open. Of course, this is the front driver's hatch, and we see the crew hatch with the gun 90 degrees to the front of the vehicle. So the vehicle is facing towards us now, the front of the hull. And of course, aiming on these FPV drones, I'm not sure, but aiming to get down into those hatches, because once the hatches are open, of course, the armor is really null and void for what is inside. But we have this better, clearer image of this here. I can guarantee that this is an Abrams. So what has happened here? Well, unsure. Now, the hatches are open. What may say that the crew was able to get out of this. Maybe it hit a mine. A mine had a mobility kill through track, through hitting the mine, and then the crew has left the vehicle here. Regardless, this is in a position where it is going to be furthermore destroyed. So at least visually, that is 2, being about 6% of these has been taken down. Now, I know that isn't, 20, it's not that important, but the reason I'm saying this is the symbolic reason that if we're seeing this more modern stuff being thrown into here, therefore we know that this is a very important area that they're trying to hold. Now, more importantly, in this same area right here, so geolocated to here, we see this kink in the road where this lines up. Now, you'll be familiar that right around here, we did see geolocated footage too of the Russian troops coming into the M2 Bradley being destroyed. So it's right in this same area, like I'm saying, people throwing everything at this. But geolocated to here is a more important vehicle again. Now, this is an M1150 assault breacher. Now, people are saying this is an Abrams. Well, yes, no, it sits on an Abrams hull. This is an assault breacher. Of course, this is just in service of the Americans, but this is a more important vehicle. This is like an engineering type vehicle. It sits on Abrams hull, but is to breach lines. Same with the, I'm not sure exactly what the designation is for the Leopard types that came from Finland, but they were far more important than the Leopards as well, to actually push through defensive works, of course, with mine clearing and an amount of engineering kit on these. Now, one of these has been geolocated and destroyed in that this area that I'm showing you right here. So we see on this drone come in. And of course, just the amount of fighting in this region is absolutely massive. We can see this vehicle on fire here. Let's skip forward a little bit and can confirm that is then what that type variant of vehicle is here. And again, smoke from things like cupolas, your hatches on top for a more simple term, is not a good sign for these vehicles. So you can see as well just the shape of the actual turret that is this type of vehicle. So again, that is a very important vehicle there. Now people will point at me and go, you're only showing this because of propaganda reasons, because you're paid by the Kremlin. No, that's why I showed the T90 and the BVM at the very beginning of this, because we're saying both sides are throwing a lot of troops and a lot of their equipment that they really can't afford to lose in large numbers directly into here, because this is very important. Now, why, Willie? Why is this area important? Well, we saw this very fast push through Avdiivka, and that the defensive lines fell once and then twice. So let's have a look. Now, what do I mean by once and then twice? Well, it seemed to hold just on the outskirts of Lastachini for a couple of days and then collapsed back to Avdiivka, Berdachi area. Now, this is by Clement Molin, and he's a Ukrainian bloke who is giving these defensive works on where these actually are. Now, we can see where these works were around Avdiivka. Now, these have fallen. Now, of course, we see this waterway here. Now, this is where Avdiivka is down in here. And then we see Berdachi sits just around here as well. And we can see the lack of defensive works in those areas. This, of course, being the first defensive line and this being the second defensive line. He draws some lines on this to give a better idea of this right here. So this is the first, second lines that Ukraine is trying to hold Russia as long as possible in this first defensive line. Of course, places like Avdiivka, Berdachi, Semenivka here to build up and reinforce the second defensive works through here. You don't want a rolling momentum of armor and troops and fabs from air-launched, from airframes rolling through here. So throwing everything at this specifically for that reason. So just to give an idea of this. Now, let's have a look at Avdiivka today. Now, showing very similar right here. This is that push out from Avdiivka to Semenivka in here, showing fairly similar, but situation west of Avdiivka. During the last hours, Ukrainian army was able to push back Russian army from positions in Berdachi and Avdiivka. In addition, Russian bombardment over Thankyou continue without changes on the ground. So Ukraine is throwing a lot of this, and they are being able to, up in Berdachi, Semenivka, able to push back and hold off these Russian advances in here, down in the south, saying that there are no differences. This is why we're going to see an increase in combat losses when there's an increase in push and fighting in here. People like to make out like once you're not going to have any losses when you're fighting a war. You're going to have losses. This is why militaries have equipment in large numbers, because they know that equipment is going to be lost. And just because you're seeing lost equipment doesn't mean that therefore whoever's equipment is that is losing. Now, Sirek says this: following the arrival of reinforcements, Ukraine army has managed to temporarily stabilize the Avdiivka front around the first line of defense. The aim of these offensive operations is to buy time to improve second line of defenses. And this is coming out from multiple sources that is exactly what is trying to happen there, to buy time for those second lines of defense. Now, I should have had this one first, but this doesn't matter. We'll talk about February month total. So we do see here that Russia gained 0.02%. This is of total Ukrainian land over the month of Feb, of course, being their largest gains in now a 12-month period. Of course, this yellow is the Ukrainian counter-offensive here. War map arrives this at the end of Feb. Russian occupies 17.51% of Ukraine. Net gain in Russians' favour of 137 square kilometres since the end of January, the largest net gain from Russia since Jan of 2023. So Russia has made a net gain of land in that month. It'll be interesting to see the months coming forward and how this will further look. Now, let's talk about Bakhmut. Then I want to talk about some airstrikes. So just come to north of where we're sitting. Of course, we did see over the last few days that Russia has made a lot of ground out around Ivanovsky, out of Bakhmut. Now, let's have a look on there. This map, situation west of Bakhmut, Russian army took control over Shiroka Street and the new sections of Shenizia Avenue inside Ivanovsky, 50% now under Russian control. In addition, troops captured new parts of the northern hills. Now, what we have spoken about in this is between Kromova, Ivanovsky, right here. There's a bit of high ground, and of course, that is helping for artillery mortars down into Chasiv Yar, where Russia have an ultimate goal of getting to, and have pushed, it's looking like on this map, more into this area here. But we see that change, and maybe some down in here. But the other bits of the front line, as far as inside of Ivanovsky itself, I think looks very, very similar between Deep State, of course, this one, which is the Ukrainian map, and Syriac maps. And now these tend to be maybe 1 or 2 days different, but otherwise, if we have two maps from two different sources lining up, maybe with different biases, that is what we like. Now, we do see on this map, we do see that over the past 24 hours, Russia has gained more control into Novomyolivka in here. And we do have some no, it's not geolocated, sorry, but Ukrainian sources and Russian sources are sharing this, saying that it is in the center of Novomyolivka, but I haven't seen a geolocation yet. If you remember the video yesterday, we had a geolocation in Novomyolivka, more down in these areas here. Maybe it was 2 videos ago, but this is saying that it is in the center, but take this with a grain of salt. But show you this for the purpose of this whole area is really just now reduced to rubble. We have, of course, unit flags here of the Marines. And I probably can't show that. You can show combat stuff from Ukraine. You can't show it from Russia on this platform. But so this is the Ukrainian sources map. When you've pushed up into here, this area, of course, across here is getting closed off. And, of course, there's going to be a lot more flanking support, both from the south and the east, pushing west in Novomyolivka as well. There are some videos that have come out across TikTok of Ukrainian soldiers speaking in here about how poor the situation is, and speculating that it may be some abandonment by command here as well. It was a bit of a goodbye video. I was going to show it, but I've chosen not to. Anyway, southwest of Donetsk, this area, Russian army made new advances inside Novomyolivka, until Church of Miracle and Michael the Archangel, reaching the center of the locality, which is contested now. So these maps, I think, show basically the exact same, except for a close up through here, which realistically this area is probably strategically closed for combat use anyway, so fairly similar. Now, we get a hell of a lot about aircraft on this, about people claiming to shoot down aircraft. There's no evidence of it, blah, blah, blah. We've spoken about this over the past week. It's given me something to speak about. And of course, we had the Air Force commander yesterday speaking about then the grass fire, what was proven to be wrong. It's funny because it's actually still on his Telegram. I double checked just 10 minutes ago. It hasn't deleted the post. Reputation is very, very important when it comes to things like this. But there's still a lot of these fabs being dropped, and I want to talk about the air defense and maybe reasons for these claims further. But where we are going to push is down, I'll show on this map actually, down into Robotny Orokhiv front here. Now, what we do know is that Russia is desperately trying to regain the Surovikin lines of defense through here that did hold through the majority of the counter offensive. They are trying to get that back desperately. And what we are seeing is we're seeing a lot of the fabs working in the east, drop, of course, the glide bombs, but not too much in the south. But that has seemed to shift over the past, say, 24 or 48 hours. And why is this? I think it's actually moving air defense around. So remember, about a month ago, most of the fabs are being dropped in the Kherson Oblast across onto the right bank. Now, in the last month, we've seen most out in the east, and now we're seeing them down in the south. I think, one, it's going to be drop them where they're pushing in support of course, the troops on the ground in a combined arms movement, but also there's going to be increased air activity where they can pick up. There's not too much air defense also, and Ukraine doesn't have enough air defense to cover everywhere, so they are going to have to shift this around at points. So they're trying to regain in here. Now, we do have some footage of fabs being dropped. So we see this first one here is just out from Verbove along this road. And you can see that the precision of these has seemingly got a hell of a lot better because they are then dropped adjacent to the road and do go along the road. So you see the first two dropped here, and then the third one. So, you know, for a gliding munition with a fairly rudimentary targeting system, seems to be fairly accurate on this. And this is said road through here. So we have Verbove, Robotny. This is geolocated to right here. Where is this? Well, it's about right here. Robotny, Verbove. It is this road here that they are actively targeting. Of course, these are going to be used for further pushes down into these areas. Now, we have another geolocation that sits just from the north east of Robotny, so we can see where these paddocks line up. And look, it sits right about here-ish that we're seeing increased. And then this, sorry, I should say these are all from the past 24 hours. We're seeing an increase in these fab drops here as well. And then further, sorry, we shift the camera. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, of course, these planes can carry a different amount of these depending, because they range from 250 kilograms to 2,500 kilograms. A lot of the Su-34s, I believe, are carrying 4 of the 500 kilogram ones from at least the makeup that I've seen, but I could be incorrect on that. Feel free to correct me. So an increase on fab bombings right about here and then along this road. And of course, this lines up with trying to recover down here, and Russia is trying to push out from Verbove here. Now, we've seen more and more claims of those coming down over the past few weeks with very, very little evidence or fabricated evidence from other videos. But this came out today. So, of course, this bloke down here, Chuck, he's the same guy that then claimed the hay fire, grass fire, whatever we're looking at in that video that was 4 days old yesterday. But of course, eventually the downing of another Su-34 saying that there are no enemy aircraft over the occupied territory of Ukraine. So he was sharing here a screenshot of some sort of radar saying that there is a reduced use of aircraft on various routes. This is not the first time since the beginning of the war, but is a consequence of effective fire of the Air Force recently. And Ukrainian pages have been sharing this, saying that for the first time since Feb 24, that there's no Russian fighters in the air. That's incorrect, even if you translate the post. And Ukraine paper is saying that no, it's not the first time, but a consequence of effective fire. Of course, the claims of shooting down multiple of these aircraft. So this here from Ignat, he is the Air Force spokesman. So of course, Oleschuk, who shared this, he is the Air Force commander. He said today, the means of countermeasures provided to Ukraine by Western partners demonstrate their effectiveness. This is evidenced by the number of downed enemy planes in February. The current task is to protect the frontline territories from the use of enemy-guided aerial bombs. Now, there is proof of an increase in Russian bombers and AWACS being taken down. Absolutely, you cannot deny this. We saw the A-50 and evidence of 1 or 2 of the bombers. But I think where this is going is to demonstrate the effectiveness to the Western partners. And I think what it is trying to get more air defense in, that this is a whole information campaign around, hey, look how effective all this is. Because of course we know that a lot of people are not looking twice at evidence. They're just taking what is said as true. They're just sipping the bloody Kool-Aid going, yeah, great, 13 went down. Don't need evidence of this. And I think then let's claim this, demonstrate the effectiveness, therefore we'll get more air defense into the country. I think that's where that is all coming from, if that makes sense. Now, what we are going to talk about then next, I want to have a look at this video, actually. This is from a Russian soldier here, as far as he's being an anti-drone soldier. And this is translated to English, I believe. So saying this is a drone detector. There's a suppression system, antenna suppression system. Powerful then, the antenna, so basically a battery block in a magazine pouch. Instead of magazines, now carries power banks to power all this, and a over-under shotgun, or to try and shoot down then a drone. So this is something that we will see, I guess, more and more into modern warfare. Is of course this guy he'll be with guys with magazines and whatever, but he is basically an electronic warfare soldier, and instead of magazines, carrying a hunting rifle and some sort of detection equipment for drones. Now, I don't know how any of this detection equipment works. I have no idea. But it's just interesting to see soldiers in a specific role for that. Now, let's have a look at then ceasefire discussions, I guess, out of Turkey, or at least recommendations more so. Sorry, had the postman rock up. Anyway, the Turkey hopes to talks for a ceasefire in Ukraine will start soon. From their foreign minister, Hakan Fidan, said on Friday, of course, he met with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, who has been all through the media since the beginning of the war. Says some wild shit. Anyway, saying on the issue of Ukraine, our view is that both sides have reached the limits of what they can get by war. We think that it is time to start a dialogue for a ceasefire. And look, saying reach the limits of where you can get by war, if we look over the graph here of how much change in territory has actually happened like over the last 12 months and have a look at the maps here, how much has actually changed? Very, very little. Has the limit been reached through this attritional warfare now? Is it realistic to say that Russia is going to be able to get for where they want to get through, you know, the whole sort of Donbass region up through Zapoblast, Kherson, you know, what people will claim that is Russia's goal? Is it realistic by warfare, I'm meaning, by frontline, to get down to then liberate places like Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk? You know, is this realistic? And some will say no. And I'm sort of on that bit too, not to put my own opinion in this, but I haven't seen any systems that have been given to Ukraine or that Russia has developed yet that are enough to, you know, take back what they are saying as their ultimate goal. Have we reached the military, you know, war part of how far this can actually be exploited? And is it the beginning to try and see what diplomatic solutions could at least be made here, at least a conversation? I don't know. That doesn't mean recognising the occupation, recognising that Russia actually has these areas. But issues of sovereignty and ceasefire should be discussed separately. So ceasefire and the recognition of sovereignty are two separate issues, he is saying. Of course, NATO member Turkey, which shares a maritime border with both Ukraine and Russia in the Black Sea, has sought to maintain good ties with both nations, sort of. Ankara has provided military support to Ukraine, voiced support for its territorial integrity, but also opposes sanctions on Russia. One big thing, Turkey also allows all the NATO planes in territory above the Black Sea to provide all this intelligence into Ukraine as well. People say that Turkey is working for the Kremlin. They're not. They've just kept open. They've actually kept open dialogue, and they have voiced concern about the sanctions going ahead further too. Anyway, saying more, the death and injury of more than 500,000 people and the complete destruction of the infrastructure and superstructure of an entire country is not a reality that is bearable for us. This has to stop somehow. To stop this, there should be some discussions, and everybody should get used to this idea. And I'd like to ask you guys, do you think that militarily the success, whether you're on the pro-Russian side, the success over Ukraine can happen? Do you think Russia has enough to do that? And if you're on the Ukrainian side, do you think that the amount of equipment support that the West is seemingly to pull back on at the moment, especially the US, is enough to actually militarily regain the territories that are currently occupied? I don't know, but he says to think not, and it's now, you know, time. Have you exploited the military aspect of this? Is it the beginning to start sort of a political aspect of discussion? I don't know, I'll just report this. Anyway, the MOD is saying then this day, the average daily number of Russian casualties killed and wounded in Ukraine throughout Feb 24 was the highest it has been since the start of the war at 983. They're pulling these numbers, of course, from the Ukrainian claims, and they release that every 24 hours about how many Russians have been killed. I've said many, many times, I don't believe any numbers. I don't care whose mouth it's coming out of. I don't care if it's coming out of Zelensky or Putin or mine or Dennis or Lily's. I don't give a shit. I don't believe any casualty figures from this because it would just be impossible to get. Anyway, my rant done. The increase of the daily average almost certainly reflects Russia's commitment to mass and attritional warfare. Although costly in terms of human life, the resulting effect has increased the pressure on Ukraine's positions across the front line. We're seeing areas move. To date, Russia has highly likely lost over 355,000 personnel killed and wounded during the Ukrainian war. Now, Interesting in this because the think tanks, the investigating in this, will put it at a much lower number when they look at social media posts, newspapers, whatever. But of course, those numbers could be very different with people being classified as missing in action, whatever. Anyway, let's say it's 355, that how many are killed and wounded. We see Ukraine's numbers now well into the 400,000s, just saying killed. If this is killed and wounded, you're probably talking maybe 3 to 1-ish wounded to killed. We're not really sure. But again, take a word of advice from me. If you take anything away from this, don't listen to these numbers. It would be impossible to get. I'm sure we'll get a range after the war, but the casualties on the Russian side and the Ukrainian side are massive, and they are bloody horrific. Both sides are going to be within tens, if not hundreds of thousands. It is a war of this scale is a horrible, horrible thing. Now, I need to speak about Speaker Johnson and the House of Reps. Of course, that money has been held up there now for a number of months, looking to get more funding into Ukraine. Of course, there isn't out of money for Ukraine. The Presidential Drawdown Authority from Mr. Biden still has $4 billion in it that could be used for Ukraine. But of course, they're saying that they want that to be guaranteed to be refilled. So, yeah, there's money still there that's not being through that I believe should be more looked at going. Instead of criticising, Mike Johnson straight off the bat, you're going, you've still got $4 billion. That could have helped us a lot in shells. But let's look at what CNN has written today, because they've seemingly got the exclusive on this about this money. So Speaker Johnson swiftly derailed the Senate's bipartisan aid package for Ukraine. Of course, wasn't letting it go onto the floor that came out of the Congress. But he's left open the door to a new proposal emerging in the House. And we'll go over this new proposal. Johnson has met with House Republicans who have been trying to build support for a new bipartisan foreign aid package that includes restrictions on the US border with Mexico. So this is where the two sides are. So the aid package is to Taiwan, Israel, Ukraine, and to support the US border. Now, try find in that try find a group of people that can actually agree on something. You can probably see where the problem is. Of course, you've got the more conservative side don't want to fund Ukraine, want a more secure border. More so the secure border. There are a lot of conservatives who do agree with funding Ukraine, especially if you look historically. But let's just say that the securing the border, that's where the conservatives really want to sit. If you look at the progressive side, so the left-wing side, really want to fund Ukraine, don't want to fund Israel, don't want to fund, to the same degree, the US-Mexican border either. So, of course, you've got problems right there anyway. Johnson has not yet taken a position on the plan or committed to giving it a floor vote. So, of course, he can take things on and off the floor, but once it goes onto the floor, it still needs to get the votes to go through. Also, still getting legislation through the House remains an extremely tall order. Republicans are badly divided over Ukraine and saying that Trump could effectively kill the bill with one social media post because he's supportive of Republicans. Plus, ample Democratic support would be needed to pass it. A tall order given the aid package includes new border restrictions and aid to Israel that would likely prompt a revolt on the left. Russia is making gains in Ukraine. Proponents say action is needed immediately. Fitzpatrick plans to begin a process this week to circumvent leadership and force a vote known as the Capitol as a discharge petition, of course, to get rid of Mike Johnson, the Speaker, which would require support from the majority of the House members to succeed. But the organisers of that effort recognise that it's amounts to a long shot bid and consider it a last resort. Their best bet is to convince Johnson to put the bill on the floor once it's ready for action. So there is a way to have this discharge petition to get the Speaker out, put things on the floor, but you still need the majority of the House members to succeed in this, and people are saying it's a last resort, and also a lot of people saying that it's a very bad look to do this as well, that it is a downfall of the system. The foreign aid has been developed by a bipartisan group of members, would provide $66 billion in military aid to Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and removing humanitarian aid that was part of the Senate package and a priority of many Democrats. So like I just spoke before, Democrats, as I'm sort of blanketing people here, but aren't in super support of military aid to Israel, are for humanitarian aid. So it's been removed out of there. And 66 billion, originally that 95 billion, 61 billion was for Ukraine. We don't know now what the breakup actually looks in this. Anyway, moreover, in this, it would deny entry of undocumented immigrants into the US until operational control of the border is achieved. So basically closing off that border and the policy they're saying called remain in Mexico. So I sort of think building a deal knowing it's not actually going to push through, but we do know different deals are being proposed all over the place. Anyway, but the proposal is bound to be a hard sell with many Democrats who are opposed to the immigration restrictions, as well as the lack of humanitarian aid, and a number of progressives want to place conditions on aid to Israel amid the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, like we spoke about. And then this bloke, Fitzpatrick, says, well, it's like a water balloon. Every change you make, you're going to have to add or lose votes. And that's why we're trying to find the point of equilibrium, that sweet spot, so we can get the 218 votes. So it's going to be interesting to see where this then actually goes. Anyway, legends, I know this one probably wasn't as good as yesterday, but I'm not feeling very bloody well at all. But look after yourselves, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.